In tonight's first pre-election segment, we turn to the race for Suffolk County District Attorney. Our guest is one of the candidates in the Democratic primary on September 4th. We'd like to welcome Shannon McAuliffe. Thank you very much for being with us again.
Thank you for having me again.
Shannon, I want to talk about your background. I know you used to be a public defender, but after that you began to run a diversionary program for former offenders. And I guess as a preparation to being a DA, what's the connection?
Well, the connection is that I ran 2 sites at ROCA. ROCA is a really smart, strategic alternative to jail. It's a nonprofit that's based in Chelsea and Boston. I ran both of them at different times, so Chelsea for 1 year and Boston for 2 years. It services all of Suffolk County. The connection is that ROCA is literally proven to reduce recidivism. So when we have young people who are involved in the system, who are having a hard time, who have been thrown out of school and don't know how to work, we can make really 2 different choices if they make a mistake and they come back into the system. We can either hold them accountable by punishing them and throwing them in a cold, dark place, and they are between 17 and 25, and I guarantee that they'll soak that in and it will change the trajectory of their life. Or we can actually hold people, young people, accountable in a pro-social way where we hold them accountable, but we help them learn and grow so that they can actually move on and move up and out of the system, which makes all of us better. We know now that when people go to jail, it's more likely when they get out that they're more likely to commit crime, not less likely. So I think whenever we can, we need to do whatever we can do to actually lift people up and out of the system so that we're all safer, so we stop spending hundreds of millions of dollars on jail, which is $55,000 a year, and we actually get people to the things that make them strong so we can build our communities and people.
Well, I imagine this would change your thinking about sentencing requests. Exactly how?
Well, sentencing requests really depend on who's in front of you. I think there are 2 categories of people, really, those that we are scared of and probably have good reason to be scared of. If the only way that we can remain safe is to put somebody behind bars for a very long time, that's certainly what the DA's office will do under my leadership. But for people who've made a mistake that aren't necessarily a giant safety risk, we have to really figure out how we don't just use jail as an option all the time. It should be a last resort. It's, for example, if your arm hurt, right, and you went to the doctor, they wouldn't all of a sudden just cut it off. They would actually figure out what's wrong with it, do some tests, try some things beforehand, and I think we owe that to our community, to our young people. We used to think that being tough on crime actually worked, that it deterred people, but what we've learned is that it doesn't. It actually increases somebody's likelihood that they will come out and commit more crime. And so if we want to have less crime and we want to have increased safety and we want to save our money for the things that matter, we need to simply find another way whenever possible.
We've heard a lot of talk from candidates and even beyond that about having no prison time for people who are just nonviolent drug offenders, even if it's trafficking. But there are these pockets we have in Boston sometimes. It could be on a dead-end street or a public housing development where dealers, they're not discreet, they're not trying to hide anything, they're terrorizing the neighbors. What do you do about that?
Well, I think there's a difference. There's a difference between somebody who is a hardcore dealer who's going to keep going on and on and on and probably needs to be punished, versus somebody who is dealing to support their habit, dealing because they don't have any other options. So it's not like I'm saying that we should just always use a diversionary program, but if somebody is drug addicted, they're going to go in jail with a handful of challenges, they're going to come out with a boatload of challenges, and community pays. They'll be more likely to go back to drug dealing, and I think we need to figure out how, when the person is in front of us, how do we ensure that it's less likely they're going to commit more crime when we're done with them and the case, as opposed to more likely. But if you are a repeat drug trafficker, well then certainly you have to be prosecuted harshly and you will go to prison, because again, it goes back to safety. If the only way we can keep our community safe is to put you in jail and there's no other option, well then that's what the DA's office will do. But again, there are so many times and moments in the system where we can simply do better and do different to get a different result.
This is BNN News, and we're talking with Shannon McAuliffe, candidate for Suffolk County District Attorney. Shannon, I'm sure you're familiar with the story that came out in the Washington Post about that enormous racial disparity in which murders get solved.
Yes.
What would you like to do about that?
Well, what I'd like to say, first of all, is this wasn't surprising to me from being a public defender for 12 years in Suffolk County. I have always believed and seen, and it's been my experience, that skin color, income, and zip code simply determines everybody's fate in prosecution, and depending on that, people get a different result. So under my leadership, that simply wouldn't happen. I know one of the candidates has said that there should be a new unit, and they should really be looking into shootings, especially when people aren't murdered. But I think that's really prosecution 101. I think that's what this prosecutor's office should have been doing. And if it hasn't been doing that, we should ask some serious questions to candidates who have been part of that DA's office who haven't actually been doing that job. But at the end of the day, victims are victims by virtue of being victimized. And we need to ensure that everybody gets equitable treatment. There's no reason that it should be twice as likely that your homicide is solved or an arrest is made if you're white than you're black. I don't buy the argument that it's because it's harder for people to cooperate. I'm sure that is part of it, but that doesn't excuse the great inequity that we're seeing in this report.
What about the problems for witnesses? Is it the lack of trust of who's on your staff? Is it that they're afraid of some kind of retribution from the street?
I think it's a lot of different factors, but at the core, I think we have a lot of people living in communities who don't feel like they have been respected, they have been seen, they have been heard, they have been protected. Instead, they have been over-policed and over-surveilled. If you look at the Washington Post report that shows that if you are black, you get a different result than if you are white, then it would make sense that you would have a much harder time actually trusting the people who want you to cooperate. So it begins with, first, ensuring that everybody in the system is dealt with equally. And once people feel like they're being taken care of and feel that they're being serviced at the same rate as others, then I believe that trust will build and that we'll be able to solve more crimes. But it's not something that's going to happen overnight.
Well, one issue you have brought up in a couple of forums at least is donations by many police officers
Yes.
to one of the other candidates. A lot of lawyers are giving money to all the candidates. You've gotten some
Yes.
money from public defenders. So,
Yes.
I mean, is one worse than the other in any way?
Well, on September 5th, if I wake up as DA, I am not holding any other lawyers accountable that have given me money, as far as somebody who's a public defender, somebody who's a defense attorney. This is different. This office should not keep operating the way that it always has. What's always happened is that when there's an incumbent or when there's somebody who's been anointed by somebody, then the entire office gets together. They all feel like they have to get money, and we know that they all don't make a lot of money. So we're taking money from people who it's hard-earned, and they feel like they have to give it to this candidate either to keep their job, to get promoted, or for whatever reason. But I think if we're going to all be talking about doing things differently, it should start with the campaign. Justice isn't for sale. This isn't an appropriate relationship between somebody who's going to be your boss, somebody who's going to be deciding on who's promoted, somebody who's going to be deciding on really meritocracy, who should be where and why. It should no longer matter who you know and how much money you've had to give to that candidate. And that's why I made a pledge early on. I would not take any money from any current DA or their families. And I'd make a pledge further on that if I win, I will never take money from anybody in that office, and I will never take money from police. I believe it's a conflict of interest, and I don't even think it should be legal. And I will never do that if I am the district attorney.
I want to ask about another kind of policy that can make a difference in the case flow, and that's about decisions on bail. Would you do something differently from what's been the past?
I would. I mean, what cash bail has done is really criminalize poverty in a lot of different ways. So if you have somebody, again, who I'm saying that is too dangerous to be out on the street and we can't actually assure anybody's safety, then there's a dangerousness hearing and you have that, and somebody is kept in jail pending the result of their case. But bail in and of itself is really just to assure somebody's appearance. If you're poor, setting a high bail doesn't encourage you or make it more likely that you're going to appear in court because you don't have any money to pay to get out of jail. As a public defender, I have seen people in jail for days, weeks, months, and sometimes years before they've ever been convicted of anything. And I've also seen their cases dismissed at the end of the day. I've seen pleas to much less time. So we have to figure out what we do differently. So for me, there would be no cash bail for misdemeanors, no cash bail for nonviolent felonies, and no cash bail for any case in which the DA wouldn't ultimately be asking for jail time. Because why would you incarcerate somebody before their case has been concluded if you're never even looking for jail time in the first place.
I've also heard a lot of talk from different candidates about increasing diversity in the staff of the DA's office.
Yes.
You want to do that? How would you make it happen?
Well, I think you have to recruit in the right places. A lot of times there's an excuse of, we just can't find good people. Larry Krasner in Philadelphia is their new DA. He has done amazing things in that office to change the culture. He has a stack of resumes from people all over the country. It's also about going into our own communities. And again, it goes back to trust. If we have a DA's office that is trusted by the community, if we have a DA's office that doesn't only punish, but actually tries to help build people in communities whenever possible, I think more people will want to be part of that, and it will be easier to actually recruit people. And the thing we have to remember too is being a DA isn't meant to be a career for every single person. It's also meant to be a training ground. So there's no reason that we can't attract a great, diverse staff to train them up and then have them go off and do other great things in their lives.
As you probably know, there is a group of people who are calling for a boycott of Faneuil Hall,
Yes.
and they want to change the name of that hall, and that affects your plan for a rally. What's your response to them?
Well, so I am planning a rally tomorrow, Tuesday, August 14th at 6 p.m. at Faneuil Hall. And my response is this. I believe that there are a lot of different ways to deal with the history of Faneuil Hall. This is something that is part of our history. And personally, I believe that changing the name somehow doesn't give it the proper respect. We need people, and we need to continue to educate everybody about our painful history. Being DA, I think it's very important to actually recognize our complicated history of slavery and also of great revolutions and triumphs. But we have to really face and recognize that our history has a lot to do with what our criminal justice system is today. And that's why I chose this place. I want to speak very plainly about what I see and the discrimination I see in the system and simply what needs to change.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Shannon McAuliffe, candidate for Suffolk County District Attorney.